here about ammunition. What's so important about ammunition? Well, its use. During war, you might need to fire your enemy's ammunition. Americans, we like to make stuff super tight-fitting when it comes to rifles, for accuracy's sake. The Russians, on the other hand, they tend to like to wait till we make something, and then they'll make something just enough different that we can't fit their ammunition into our cans, but our ammunition will fit into theirs. There's a couple of good stories, well, a few of them actually, more than just a couple. In Israel, 1946, 1947, and 1948, it was difficult for an Israeli to get, or for a Jew. It wasn't Israel at the time. It was just Jewish settlements in Palestine. Now, the Palestinians kept coming through and just annihilating everyone. They literally sold the same parcels of land, literally the same settlement, 3 times to the Hebrew people. Once prior to World War II, once during World War II, and once after World War II. Alright, sorry, not once during World War II, once immediately after World War II, and then once a couple of years after that. Now, one of the problems that the Jewish settlers had is, well, they were able to get rifles. They were able to smuggle in some rifles that were made by Israeli slaves, or Hebrew slaves, I should say, of the Third Reich. They were making the Mauser Gewehr Carbiner 98. And they made the sights off by just a little bit. However, the Israelis, they needed the sniper rifles. Everything else about the rifle was perfect, and they got the cheap because of sabotage. It's difficult for the Germans to compensate the way that the Israelis did, knowing that the problem was there. Now, one of their ammunition types was lipstick. How did that work out? Well, they couldn't get casings, so they'd get lipstick containers. And they would press the lipstick containers the best they could to fire ammunition. Because the brass casing on the lipstick containers at the time. Now, later on during the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese were using a lot of Russian guns. The Russian guns that were made during World War II, there was a lot of different types of guns made, but a lot of the Russian guns in World War II were made so that they could fire Russian ammunition or German ammunition. They were fighting the Germans. By the end of the war, it was a little bit different, and they started fine-tuning things to fire whatever the Americans happened to be firing at the time. And this carried on into Vietnam. During Vietnam, one of the things the Vietnamese would do is they would capture American ammunition, and we used both 7.62 by 51 ammunition, as well as the 5.56, which is became a NATO standard round. Now, the Russians, some of their other rifles are even bigger than that. There's actually a Russian rifle that was very popular at the time during the Vietnam War that fired a little bit different rounds than a 50 caliber. You couldn't fit a 50 BMG with Russian ammunition, but you could fit the 50 BMG round into the Russian gun. So if the Russians, in a pinch, in an emergency, needed to, they could still fire American ammunition, be it with reduced accuracy and a possibility that it's not going to eject the cartridge, or it won't eject it fully. Now, one of the things that the Vietnamese would do, they could get American ammunition, and they could put it in their guns, and they could fire it, and they could save the shell casings. That was pretty important for them. A lot of the guns they used were also left over from the French, like the MAT 49. Now, the MAT 49 was rechambered for being able to fire Russian handgun ammunition instead of the 9mm Luger Parabellum. But the Russians, well, they definitely made guns that would fire the 9mm Luger Parabellum, but could also fire a Russian standard round. Because at the time, and just as today, 9mm is still one of the most popular handgun rounds worldwide, for military and otherwise purposes. So it's easy to get 9mm ammunition, and the chances of you fighting against somebody who uses 9mm ammunition are pretty significant. American doctrine is to make our stuff so that it'll only fire our stuff. Russian doctrine is to make their stuff so that it'll fire their stuff, and in a pinch, fire American stuff. Now, the Vietnamese could use the brass catchers, and they could use Russian sniper rifles and use American ammunition through Russian sniper rifles. And then after they fired the ammunition, strangely enough, the ammunition would conform to the shape of the, well, for example, the 7.62 by 54mm Russian shell. If you had a sniper rifle, you could fire American ammunition out of it. And then after you'd fired the American ammunition out of it, the brass casings, the brass American casings, could now be used as Russian casings. It was unsafe. It made it inherently unsafe to use the ammunition, because basically you were stretching it and giving it a bunch of little stress fractures. But it seated itself perfectly in place, which helped to prevent it from completely splitting, which has been a problem with other types of ammunition. But they literally reloaded used American ammunition that was fired out of a Russian sniper rifle, and loaded those American casings that are now in the shape of Russian casings. Then you could fire it out of a semi-auto. It just wouldn't be safe. It was recommended that those rounds only be fired through a bolt-action rifle, because they're inherently unsafe. The possibility of a crack exploding inside of the receiver itself instead of in the locked position, it meant that you had a lot of problems with the internal workings of the gun that could be messed with by the heat exchange as well as by the pressure. And the Russians, they used extensive pressed stampings, whereas Americans, although we had stampings that we used primarily during World War II and also the M3 grease gun during Vietnam, for the most part, we liked the casting technique. Casting and milling. The M16 is cast and milled. It makes for a more accurate rifle, in our opinion. But also, some Russian shooters with what are called sporterized Russian semi-autos are able to keep up with American accuracy out of a 223. That's a 5.5 American round. But the 5.56 NATO round, although you can fire 223 ammunition out of a 5.56 barrel, you can't fire a 5.56 round out of a 7.62, out of a 223 barrel safely. The reason for that is because, well, there's a lot more potency behind the 5.56. It's a military round. It has to travel further, it has to be more accurate, and it has to potentially make its way through somebody's body armor. With a 223, you're using that for getting varmint. In a lot of places, it's actually illegal to shoot a deer with a 223. It's considered too small. Now, with our ammunition doctrine, we like to insist that everybody use our ideas of ammunition. The Israeli, well, they decided what ammunition they wanted, and they used both Russian and American ammunition, as well as surplus German ammunition. They took whatever they could get their hands on, and to this day, the Mauser is still considered one of the top sniper rifles in the world. The Remington 700 is what the Marine Corps Scout snipers use, as well as a lot of United States police forces. The Remington 700 and the 710. Now, as far as ammunition goes, we've got 7mm ammunition as well. And pretty much every caliber of gun that we could potentially use. The Russians have a different version, just enough different that their ammunition will not fit in an American gun. Just enough of a difference in the size of the cartridge, even though they both say 7.62. The Russian is just 1/1000th of an inch larger. So American ammunition will fire through. It won't catch the lands and grooves quite as perfectly as Russian ammunition. But if you put Russian ammunition in an American gun in that situation, it won't feed all the way in, first of all. And even if you can cram it in far enough to fire it, the fact is that the round is stuck in the barrel, and you're going to get too much pressure behind that bullet before the bullet exits out the end of it. You're going to end up blowing up your own firearm in your face, so don't be a dumbass. Anyway, how does that apply to modern day? Well, they didn't just do it until the 1970s. The Russians are still doing that with their ammunition. With America wanting to change their ammunition again, Russia might stick with what they've got this time. Just because of time constraints and money constraints. But they might not. There's enough countries in the world that have American guns that it's worth it for them to stick around, because they're less likely to fight Americans and more likely to fight America's allies. Or people who are not allied with America or with Russia. Also, with America wanting to change their battle rifle type and change the ammunition type, there's going to be a lot of surplus American ammunition and a lot of surplus American guns that Americans aren't allowed to buy from their own government anymore. We used to have the civilian marksman program where you could actually go buy a gun, an American surplus battle rifle. An M1, an M2, not grease guns. I'm talking about the M1 Garand. You could also buy the M1 carbine or the M2 carbine from the civilian marksman program. Basically, it was a gun on loan for the rest of your life from the United States government. Guns that were used in World War II for killing Germans were used here in America in high schools all over the country to teach youngins how to shoot. We even had shooting clubs up until the 1970s. Shooting clubs in the high schools. I was watching a video about how badass Russians were because the students at the local high schools are all taught to field strip an AK-47 and how to shoot it. Whereas in America, we wouldn't allow that. Not in a million years now. But it turns out that video was actually made in the city of Kiev, the one that is currently under siege. And of course, we're doing in Kiev what the Russians did in Vietnam and what we did in Afghanistan, and the Russians did later on in Afghanistan when it was our turn there. They just use the black market, just like we do, to funnel in a whole bunch of our ammunition, or a whole bunch of their ammunition, into a third world country so that third world countries can get their asses whooped. But at least these countries, Russia and the United States, get to see their hardware in action and brag to the world. It's free advertisement, basically. The amount of weapons that they're able to sell with all the free advertising of Russian helicopters and Russian airplanes getting knocked out by surface to air, well, stuff handheld, held by human beings, not even mounted to the back of a truck. Man-portable rockets. An amazing world we live in, isn't it? Well, just so you know, the Russians got their own version of that too. The RPG-7, well, we can expect that the United States military's AR-15s and M4s will, many of them, go to foreign bidders, foreign buyers, to our allies or to third world countries that need a rifle, but they don't have enough to buy a bunch of brand new stuff. If we're trying to get in good with some tribal group in Mogadishu, well, they might end up with some surplus Colts. If the Russians decide that the opposing group in Mogadishu are the ones that they want in power, well, yeah, they might filter in some older AK-47s. So you gotta equip your army for the enemy that you're most likely to be fighting, but also to be prepared for any type of enemy. The United States, we're not likely to directly go to war with Russia. However, we are likely to go to war with people they're friends with, and they're likely to go to war with people we're friends with. When it comes to ammunition, we have the world standard as far as accuracy goes, but the Russians have the world standard in accuracy. No, not even close. They have the world standard in reliability. Russian rifles are par excellence as far as it goes when you need something to fucking work. You got to put in your enemy's ammunition in your own gun. Well, at least you're familiar with your own gun. And at least you know that ammunition's going to work. It might not work the best, but it'll work well enough to perform the function you need it for. Anyway, good to be with you. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper, and your sister's too, and no victim left behind. Also, when it comes to the Second Amendment, sure, I don't believe in owning a firearm myself. But I do believe wholeheartedly that the Second Amendment is created to protect the First Amendment. And as a result, I do speak up. I am an avid Second Amendmenter. The Second Amendment is supposed to protect the First Amendment. That's what it's there for. To protect us from tyrants. To protect we the people from tyrants. Alright, now it's time for me to try to start my vehicle. Hopefully I didn't kill it. Ah, shite. Let's see where I put my friggin' screwdriver. That's how I start my car. I gotta open up the hood and poke my starter with the screwdriver, and then it goes vroom vroom. So a lot easier to do if I pay attention to where the hell I put my screwdriver. If I put it in the same place every time, it'd be great. Anyway, when it comes to the Second Amendment, I believe in the Second Amendment. I also believe in access to ammunition. And I believe that the people being killed are the people that are least likely to have guns to protect themselves. And as a result, they have the least amount of representation and they're the least likely to be heard. This is why we have a Second Amendment. It's so that we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from that kind of tyranny. But if those of you with guns are not using them to protect that, then you are absolutely traitorous wretches who are destroying the sanctity of the Second Amendment. If you choose to utilize the Second Amendment, it's not your right anymore. It is your duty at that point. If you're claiming Second Amendment, then you own that gun specifically because of tyranny. Specifically to pretend to protect yourself and your families from tyrants. And I say pretend because you're not doing anything about the tyrants.